Hey everyone, this is Marketplace Tech Bytes. It is our weekly roundup of some of the big stories in tech and maybe some you missed. I'm Meghan McCarty, Carino. This week, we're digging into the White House proposal to take an equity stake in Intel in exchange for federal grant money. Meta is getting blowback on Capitol Hill over its latest chatbot scandal. And the White House is now on TikTok. Here to discuss all that is our regular contributor, Maria Curi. She's a tech policy reporter at Axios. Hey, Maria, good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So we got to kick things off like we always do with our bite of the week. This is a number that gives us a little insight into the week in tech. Maria, what's your number?
So my number this week is 95%. MIT came out with a new report that basically said U.S. companies are spending up to $40 billion in new AI tools, and 95% of them aren't really giving anything in return or not being productive. So it's been interesting to watch how those investments are playing out.
Right. Another kind of piece of data that seems to have rattled the tech markets this week a little bit after maybe some, lackluster showings from the GPT-5 and all that stuff. We are hoping to get into it with the authors of that MIT study soon. But first, we've got to talk about the latest in what has felt like an ongoing saga at U.S. chipmaker Intel. So the Trump administration is apparently in talks with Intel to take an equity stake in the company in exchange for federal dollars from the Chips and Science Act, which was this bipartisan bill passed during the Biden administration to provide financial incentives for chip makers to kind of bring their semiconductor manufacturing back to the U.S. Here is current Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick discussing this idea on CNBC this week.
What is in it for the American taxpayer? And the answer Donald Trump has is we should get an equity stake for our money. So we'll deliver the money, which was already committed under the Biden administration. We'll get equity in return for it, get a good return for the American taxpayer.
Okay, Maria, I mentioned that this was kind of the latest in an ongoing saga at Intel. So catch us up. What's been going on before now, and how does this new development kind of fit in?
Yeah, so Intel has been struggling to compete with its chip and AI competitors, NVIDIA, TSMC. Its leader, Pat Gelsinger, was ousted in December. It, instituted a new leader. Donald Trump went after him for allegedly having ties to China. But after a White House meeting, this is kind of where this new equity idea came from. To backtrack to on the Trump administration side, it has never really been a fan of the Chips and Science Act. The president trashed it during the election. There was some talk on whether or not it would survive and how those grants would evolve. And this is kind of the latest solution that has come up from the White House.
Right. I think there have been a lot of questions about what might happen to these funds in the CHIPS Act. Obviously, the Trump administration, while it has overtly criticized that bill, has seemed to support the overall goal of bringing more chip production back to the U.S., though it has favored kind of a stick approach compared to the carrot approach with tariffs. But is this kind of a way to split the difference? Do you think we'll see more of this approach?
Yes, I think that, all the other companies that were going to get grants under the Chips and Science Act may also be getting these types of offers, these types of opportunities. But of course, this is money that does come with strings attached, unlike just a CHIPS grant, which was, quote unquote, free money to go ahead and build production here in the United States. This other money, the Trump administration, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has said that it wouldn't come with any voting powers, no, board seats, but still it divides the amount of shares with the U.S. government. What's really interesting about this idea is that it was discussed while the Chips and Science Act was being passed into law, and its main proponent was Senator Bernie Sanders. And of course, that never came to fruition. A lot of Republicans on the Hill were opposed, and it's fascinating to see now how the Trump administration is aligned with Bernie Sanders on this approach.
Very interesting, and seems to sort of fit in a little bit with some of the other moves that we've seen recently, like this deal with NVIDIA and AMD to, take a 15% cut of their sales to China. Just this little bit more kind of involvement from the federal government in, these private enterprises.
Right. With the idea being that, you shouldn't be getting government money for quote unquote free. It's not enough to just be producing here in the United States all of the jobs that would, potentially come with it and all of the, economic potential that would come with it. There should also be a more direct, benefit for the US government. And this is how that's manifesting.
All right. Well, now we want to talk about the latest scandal at Meta that is bringing renewed scrutiny by Congress. Last week, a Reuters investigation brought to light these internal documents that detailed the company's policies on chatbot behavior. Probably the most concerning were these guidelines that deemed it acceptable for chatbots to engage children in conversations that are, quote, romantic or sensual, or kind of acknowledging their physical attractiveness. A Meta spokesperson told the BBC that the examples and notes in question were and are erroneous and inconsistent with our policies and have been removed. Unsurprisingly, this has spurred kind of outrage across, the internet and across many corners of society, but particularly among lawmakers in Washington. What are we hearing, Maria?
Right. So the fact of the matter is that this was a document more than 200 pages worth of instructions for how these chatbots should behave essentially with users that Reuters uncovered. And now, given the exposure of this document, you have senators on the Hill that are really laser focused now on holding Meta accountable. You have, for example, Senator Josh Hawley, who is a very vocal opponent of social media companies on the Hill when it comes to how they are, treating minors on their platforms, wanting to launch an investigation against Meta. We're watching for any potential hearings. Once in a while, we get a big hearing on Capitol Hill with the, biggest tech CEOs. And so something like that could potentially take place. And then, of course, you have renewed calls for specific legislation from, Senator Marsha Blackburn, who has been a huge proponent of the Kids Online Safety Act, a bill that would get at how these platforms are designing their tools.
Yeah, the Kids Online Safety Act has been kind of a bipartisan effort that has come up and sort of been shelved and come up and been shelved. What's the latest on that?
So, like you said, it's a bipartisan effort. The Kids Online Safety Act is moving its way through Congress right now, but it is facing the same sticking points, which is that these social media platforms contend that Section 230 protects them from the decisions that they make, the product decisions that they make, because they are still tied to content. What's really interesting about this is that you had the author of Section 230, Senator Ron Wyden, come out and say, on the case of AI chatbots specifically, I don't think that tech companies should be protected by Section 230. And so AI is injecting an entirely new dynamic into this debate, and we'll see how that bill advances after they come back from August recess.
Yeah, such a fascinating area to watch. Obviously, Section 230 was applying to, content posted by users. And there definitely appears to be an opening here where chatbot content, this is being generated by these platforms and kind of a legal gray area at the moment.
Absolutely. And we're also watching it play out in courts across the country, in consolidated cases, and in individual cases brought by attorneys general. We're watching a case that's unfolding in New Mexico, for example, where we do expect AI chatbots to be a pretty big feature.
All right. Well, finally, we want to move on to the latest in TikTok news. The White House has officially joined this short form video platform. And here is the first video posted to the account.
Every day, I wake up determined to deliver a better life for the people all across this nation. I am your voice.
All right, there are now quite a few more videos posted to the account. Not all of them are quite as inspirational and soaring in tone, kind of fitting in with the milieu of TikTok. But we should note here, Maria, that this comes less than a month before the next pseudo deadline for TikTok's Chinese owners to divest from the app before it's banned under a bipartisan law that was passed by Congress, which has been delayed several times. What do you make of this?
I mean, why would the White House create this account and invest in TikTok if it planned to permanently shut it down a month from now? I think that what we can expect is potentially a fourth delay. This has been delayed multiple times. And potentially, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has said that the app could go dark mid-September if a deal is not reached. But I just don't see how a deal could be reached where the Chinese government signs off on one of its most powerful companies.
Right. I mean, what do we know about what, if any, progress has been made toward this goal of the, Chinese parent company ByteDance selling to an American company?
Yeah, there hasn't been any new updates necessarily on the state of play in this negotiations. We still have the same players, Oracle, Andreessen Horowitz, Frank McCourt, all of these different players that could potentially buy the platform and take it out of Chinese ownership. But we haven't heard much from the White House on this. It's also part of broader US-China trade negotiations. And so big TBD, I think mid-September, it might just get kicked down the can some more. But what's really interesting about this is that this was first brought up by Donald Trump himself as this big national security concern. And it's been interesting to see how that's gone by the wayside as politicians, not just Donald Trump, recognize how powerful the platform is for reaching voters and constituents.
And the White House seems to have taken quite naturally to the format.
That's right.
All right, Maria Curi at Axios, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to all of you for watching Marketplace Tech Bytes Week in Review. Daniel Shin produced this episode. I'm Meghan McCarty Carino. This is APM.